Greetings, everyone. Father Leo here, 15th Sunday of Ordinary Time. And just to catch up, 2 weeks ago, we talked about plastic and plastics that were polluting the earth. Then last week, we moved into how plastics are polluting the oceans. Well, not just the oceans, but rivers and lakes, and how sooner or later, so much of the plastic that's used in our modern day culture ends up in the water. Today we move to the third one we want to talk about, and that is trees. That is trees. And so that's our theme for today, is trees. And our second readings sets the stage for it very beautifully. He says, I think I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. So I'm sure that many people are very fond of poetry. And yet this author says, lovely as a tree. And we know there's so many different sizes and shapes of trees. And then goes on to say, a tree that looks at God all day lifts her leafy arms to pray. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. And that's really something to catch hold of. I remember studying this poem, or one like it, back in high school, probably about grade 10, and I've never forgot that line, only God can make a tree. And since that time, I have seen tremendous inventions take place in our world. The internet is one of the big ones. Computers, iPads, cell phones, artificial intelligence. My gosh, there's no limit. Astronauts in space. So with all of that great creativity, at the same time, only God can make a tree. And so today we're going to talk about trees and get a sense of how important they are in our life and in the life of all creation, of all, not just humans, but all non-human life. I often think, come back to me this week, on our farm we had a stand of tall pines, about 4 acres of them. And they were beautiful trees. And I was about 10, 12 years old, and I was drawn to those pines. And there was a stump from an old tree, and I built from the limbs up, fell off pines, I built a little lean-to. And I don't know what, I was allured to, talk about being allurement. I was allured to go to that place and sit on that stump and just to be. And a little creek ran by. Chipmunks come out to play. The birds were singing in the trees. There was the whispering of the wind in the treetops. It was a place of I don't know how, looking back at it, at the time, I never thought anything about it. I just knew there was some alluring energy drawing me to that place. Now, of course, today, I can put words around it as a mystical experience and that oneness with nature. And nature was embracing me with unconditional love. And all of nature, not just the trees, the birds, the chipmunks, the water, the wind in the treetops. And that was a very sacred place for me as a young boy. And I went there often. Then I left the farm and went to Toronto. And one summer I went home. And I looked for the tall pines. And they weren't there anymore. So I said to my brother, what happened to the tall pines? Well, he said the developer came along and he looked at them and he saw houses and I saw money. So I sold him the tall pines and he cut them all down. And I remember how devastated I was to think that my little oasis of spirituality had been taken from me. I didn't know the scripture then, which said, "Be still and know that I am God." I just know there was an allurement that brought me to stillness within the embrace of nature. And so to trade today then. Recently I read a book called The Education of Little Tree. Now the story unfolds that Little Tree is walking in the forest with Big Tree, who's his grandfather. And Little Tree has answered questions for Big Tree. The education of Little Tree. And Little Tree asks particularly about the forest and the forest floor. And Big Tree tells them about the forest. That when a seed from a tree drops into the floor, and when it germinates and comes alive, and a new tree breaks forth, the roots of the near tree all shift. They all shift in order to provide the little tree with nutrients and nourishment. That's what they do, nutrient and nourishment. And when they do this, Little Tree, of course, will blossom and grow and eventually become a big tree. But what Big Tree tells Little Tree is that there's a whole life going on around the roots of the trees. A whole village, if you will. Different sizes of life. And even when a tree dies, there are little ants and bugs that take a home in that tree and it becomes alive in another way. And life goes on, it never ends. It's simply changed. So the education of Little Tree, and certainly it was a beautiful story which spoke a lot about the greatness of nature and how that interdependence of life that's there, hidden from view because it's in the ocean floor, it's in the forest floor. And also the Amazon Valley, South America, the Amazon. And it's a well-known river, the Amazon, and it really is there for the life of the people. But the rich landowners, farmers, are cutting down the trees and turning the forest into farmland. And this does not do any good for the natives. There's nothing in it for them. They continue to be poor and oppressed. But the rich farmers, landowners, gain more and more land, wherein they're able to raise more crops and make more money. But it's the destruction of the Amazon. Now, the big thing we must keep in mind is one of our friends here from Peterborough, some of you may remember her, Terry Dance. Now, Terry Dance and her husband moved to Victoria, but Terry had a great social conscience. And she has got involved with people out there who are protesting the destruction of the old growth forests. The old growth forests. They're monster trees. They've been growing there for several hundred years. But the lumber companies and the developers want to use them for lumber. And they're at the risk of life. People have been protesting the destruction of those trees. Now, the thing we have to keep in mind is that trees have a purpose. You remember last week I said the ocean has a purpose, and one of the main purpose is to provide 60% of the oxygen for life on planet Earth. Not just for humans, but all non-human life forms. And the same thing applies to trees. That trees are the lungs of the earth. And they too not only clean the air, but they also provide oxygen. Now, the hidden life of trees is all around us. And maybe to take time to sit and look at a tree for several hours might be educational. The author of this article here in the Star talks about a book which writes about the heartbeat of trees. The heartbeat of trees. Sometimes we look at a tree and we may think, well, it's not alive. Well, it is. It's throbbing with life. And it talks about the heartbeat. And so another part here talks about the winter day. On a winter day, the homes trees provide for the city's non-human life forms. And on a summer day, we can be cooled in the shade of their leafed out boughs. On an any day in spring or fall, the urban forest helps us to see patterns of migration as wave after wave of birds stop for the rest, shelter, and food that the trees provide. And so he's really talking about that. And then he says conservation authorities might be able to put a dollar value on the ecosystem services provided by our urban forest, but they will never be able to estimate the worth of the ineffable, the fragrance emanating from a stand of white pines on a blistering summer day. Hot pine, it must be the most intoxicating aroma in the world, and it's yours this summer if you visit the park. So I think what we really need to do is take a look again at trees, and it's the ecosystem and the web of life. And just as the trees are indeed one of the part of the web of life, first of all, they're vitally alive themselves. They have a beginning, and if nature has its way with them, they will live their life, they will die, but in their dying, they will give life. Life to all kinds of bugs and ants and what have you. And some of them may drop a seed, which germinates and becomes a new tree. So trees are vitally alive. That's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, trees have a purpose. And one of the purposes is the beauty they provide for people, and the canopy of shade. If you go up high enough and look out over Peterborough, you can see how green Peterborough is. There are so many trees in this city, so many trees, and they're there to a purpose again of purifying the air, of taking carbon out of the air, and putting oxygen back into the air. And of course, we and animals and other non-humans breathe in that oxygen and live. So that web of life is functioning at every level. At every level, it is functioning. For us, I think, is to plant trees. to find a way to finance and make donations to people who are planting trees. And maybe like Terry Dance, when we see people deforestation taking, clear cutting, trees being taken down, to remember that they are the lungs of the earth. And you strip the earth of its lungs, you know what that'll do to us in all life. So it behooves us to walk with nature, to evolve with nature, and to be an active member of this interdependent community, which we call creation. And I guess in many ways, I think of the indigenous people, how they saw them as sacred. I remember reading a story about Vancouver contracted with a native man to create a totem pole. He went out into the forest, and first of all, he spent a week fasting. And then he prayed, and he saw 3 trees that would work. And he prayed before each tree, trying to get a sense of which one he would cut down. Finally, when he decided which one that the Great Spirit was calling on, he knelt before the tree and apologized for taking her life. He promised the tree that, yes, he would make a totem pole for the city, but he also promised the tree that none of her would be wasted, that he would make sure that every part of that tree became useful, but sacred. And that's one of the greatest lessons that we could learn from indigenous people, of how they saw the Great Spirit embodied in all of creation. Long before Christianity appeared here in Canada, the indigenous people knew the Great Spirit. And the Great Spirit was a guiding light in their world. And in that guiding light, they saw all of creation as sacred. Water was sacred, air was sacred, the earth particularly was sacred. Trees were sacred, animals were sacred. So, in many ways, I think indigenous faith or philosophy of life or religion is now coming into the forefront in Christianity as we move more and more into creation spirituality. That our spirituality is going to be more and more tied up in our oneness with the earth, in our interdependence, and in our interrelationship with the earth, the water, the air, and all of life here on planet Earth. God bless.